ground realities.
Which is what? What is the ground reality?
Ground reality is that there was a groundswell of support for Sajith Premadasa to become the leader of the party. But in the meantime, everybody, the seniors in the party as well as us partners of the United Front government urged him to concede the leadership, at least to allow Sajith Premadasa to properly lead the campaign with his blessings, of course, and for him to take a senior position in the party. But he was being too deceptive and have deceived all of us, but we are certainly not bothered about it.
Deceived because he led you up the garden path and said that you all can have this alliance and that Sajith Premadasa can lead it and that he can be the prime ministerial candidate and so on and so forth. But now we find some of the UNP members find that he's instituted action against them, legal action.
Well, these are all measures that are going to ultimately fail and boomerang on him and the party. I am very sad to see that the grand old party has to be at this position, performing quite dismally in the campaign, and I won't be surprised if they don't even reach barely 10 seats. So it would be the end of the beginning.
It's the end of the beginning?
Beginning of the end, rather.
Okay. Now then, I'd like to ask you, as the leader of the SLMC party representing Muslim interests, I have several questions. Some of them have already come in ahead of the program. One of them is, I'd like to know, who is the leader of the Muslim community in Sri Lanka?
I don't think anybody should self-proclaim themselves as leaders.
Who will
that is
emerge?
something. No, that is something for the community to ultimately perceive and then project in their own ways. I mean, the mandate would speak out more. And then, as for me, whenever issues have arisen, when I have been called upon to give leadership, I have not, slackened away or run away from the responsibilities. As a matter of fact, in the last regime, there were several occasions in which I was invariably foisted in a leadership position to lead the entire group of members of parliament in the government ranks as well as in the opposition ranks. So we were united in issues of serious adversity when the community was faced with a variety of difficult situations.
You got into pretty big shoes when you took over from the late Mr. Ashraf. How difficult was that act to follow?
Well, it was a baptism of fire of sorts, but yet I have been under his tutelage for several years by then, and he had been a towering figure, and he was a bold leader who was always willing to take the beaten track, but then do it his own way. And being under him, they say that some leaders are like a banyan tree, that nothing grows under it.
Right.
See? But he was a different man. He nurtured and trained leaders under him. I should say things were not easy in the beginning, but then you learn by trial and error.
And Mr. Hakim, I notice from the several messages that we get and in informal discussions and so on, that there appears to be a sort of a fierce psychosis within the Muslim community, and they are apprehensive that the other side may come back. And what is this fear? Is it well founded?
No, Muslim community is a community which can always rise up from adversity. We have faced such adverse situations in the past.
Are we now in the midst of an adverse situation?
No, we have been portrayed in a very devious and wrong way among the majority community in this country. So there have been some deliberate attempts to create wrong perceptions about the community and its affairs. Mm-hmm. But it's also up to us to explain the situation and then to appeal to the good nature of the Sinhalese Buddhists in this country.
The good nature of the majority community, don't you think that they too have bona fide apprehensions when we look at the actions of some people who claim to be from the same religion as you and I?
No, in any religion you find a certain level of extremism, but then this aspect of it unfortunately had been taken too lightly. We have been too complacent at times. But then what is in fact true is that our intelligence agencies have always been properly monitoring what was happening within the community, mm-hmm. and they could never say that they were not fully aware of the fertile ground that was being created for such type of extremism. Mm-hmm. And we as leaders have also time and again been quite cautious and apprehensive about such matters, and have wherever possible attempted to see that these groups are marginalized and that their propaganda is kept to the margins. Mm-hmm. But then unfortunately none of us expected that these people could have been brainwashed into becoming such a cult. And after all, it is a small cult which virtually destroyed themselves. And what we can't see
it also destroyed our economy.
They did, to a certain extent.
And it destroyed the way of life of most Sri Lankans.
Most Sri Lankans, and mostly so for the Muslims too.
Yeah.
And it's, there had to be a serious introspection from among the community itself, and which we have already undertaken. And in this regard, as a matter of fact, for us, I have written a book on this whole issue of trying to demystify the misconceptions about Muslims, mm-hmm. and to explain various issues concerning the culture of Muslims and issues where wrong perceptions have been arrived at based on wrong facts and deliberate attempts to portray Muslims in the wrong light. So it is up to us in the first place to explain this to some of those elements who tend to all the time harp on, because most of the time these are used for political purposes, mm-hmm. And there are politicized religious groups, mm-hmm. which very conveniently using Muslims as a scapegoat to create a phobia. I mean, mm-hmm. this is a local manifestation of the international Islamophobia, which is already known.
Yeah.
You see, it's a local manifestation of it. But then the issues relating to the Easter Sunday bombings and its background have already been delved into and looked into thoroughly, and there are the Muslim community itself
Yeah.
is suspicious of various other devious elements who could have been behind this, in order to create space for themselves. And I would dare say there could have been also motives to deliberately create some destabilization, and also looking at a possible way of a regime change through that action.
And do you think, Mr. Hakim, that the Muslim community in Sri Lanka are not doing enough to integrate themselves into Sri Lankan way of life?
They are bending over backwards to do that.
Right.
As a matter of fact, the community has, ever since the war against LTT was won, we also saw a deliberate attempt at trying to create another enemy, you see, and so that you can always keep as a matter of mobilizing the people for their own political purposes, they had to look at an imaginary enemy, and this had always been a project that has been in place for quite some time. But unfortunately, some of the violent incidents that happened as a result of hate speech and hate culture, which also invariably was assisted by policies of certain regimes to create a culture of impunity for some of these xenophobic forces, which is out to discredit the Muslims at every turn.
And on that note, we'll go for a short break. We've got a few messages for you. Don't go away. After all, this is Newsline Live.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly. Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly.
And welcome back to Newsline Live. We're in conversation with Mr. Rauf Hakim, the leader of the SLMC. Mr. Hakim, can you tell me, can you name, say, 5 things that you've achieved for your community in the years that you've been at the helm of the SLMC?
As a party leader, I was able to ensure that the Muslim interests are protected when it comes to constitutional reform process. It's not simply the Muslim interests alone, but the interest of the nation as a whole, while preserving our rights in a constitutional reform process, and also on various other legislative processes. There have been attempts to deliberately marginalize the community's interest in statute making. We have been keen to have the proper amendments brought in, and that in certain cases resisting certain amendments in order to preserve our own rights as a community, and also in the interest of the nation, legislative reforms which will benefit the country has also been some achievement from our side. Then on the development side, enough have been done on many fronts.
What about the sad case of the Saudi-funded entire village in Akarai Pattu, a $15 million gift from the Saudi people, and it was languishing for years and years and years. What have you done about that?
No, this was very unfortunate that while that project had been completed as a gift from the Red Crescent Society from Saudi Arabia, as a gift towards those people who have been affected by the tsunami. As a matter of fact, those people who were affected by the tsunami were the people who lived on the coastline of the Ampara district.
Right.
Hardly any Sinhalese lived in the coastline.
Yes.
You see, it was
The Saudis didn't specify Muslim.
No, they didn't see. They didn't. But then the victims were largely Muslims from the Akkarepattu area. There could have been a few Tamil families, but when that project and the beneficiaries were identified, it naturally happened to be a preponderant majority were Muslims.
Right.
But then, as I told you, some of these xenophobic forces wanted to question the rationale of selection of beneficiaries. And this resulted in former Chief Justice too getting involved in it in an indirect fashion. Subsequently,
it is now languishing in the legal realm.
No, there is a judgment from the courts.
Yeah.
But that again was premised on the facts that was presented while the argument took place. But as a matter of fact, the rationale of selecting the beneficiaries was left to the divisional secretary of the area. And he, in fact, applied the rationale that was applied all over the country.
Right.
To select only those people who were affected by the tsunami. But finally, they imposed a condition that you must apply the district ratio of the population, which in fact is not going to be in any manner equitable when it comes to the affected victims of the tsunami.
Do you think that will ever get resolved?
It could.
This project, do you think it will be resolved? Do you think
No,
there'll be
as a matter of fact, as a matter
there?
of fact, it's a matter which has also created unnecessary diplomatic difficulty for the Sri Lankan state with the Saudi government. Several times they have brought this issue up because the buildings that have been constructed have gone into decay. They should, and they were also willing to contribute more to repair the buildings and hand over to the beneficiaries. And there is a scheme of selections that has been based on the criteria that has been imposed by courts. But then in selecting the beneficiaries, still the government agent is not able to arrive at a proper consensus.
Do you think this is all to do with communal distancing?
Definitely so. There are certain communal forces which, and also it's a question of, you see, when it comes in this entire country, the resource allocations, whenever it takes place, unfortunately, the beneficiary selection is based on deliberate ethnic and racial basis imposed by interested elements. It shouldn't be so. You must only select people based on the need, and there must be a proper needs assessment. Based on that needs assessment, you must select the beneficiaries on a very transparent criteria.
Irrespective of
any unnecessary political bias. You see, most of the time, it is the the tug of war between local politicians that decides the beneficiary selections. This shouldn't be so.
Why do we need parties who represent one's ethnicity in this modern day and age? This fact has got into other sectors as well, such as schools, etc. Isn't this kind of segmentation further deepened the separation of the people of Sri Lanka?
Ideally, you need not have parties representing one community or the other. But I would say even the so-called national parties, when it comes to ultimate decision making, decisions are sometimes made on the wishes of the majority. You see, so this has ultimately created the impression that invariably the minorities get discriminated at different turns. So you have seen ever since independence the need for representation in representative bodies, whether it is legislature, provincial councils, the local authorities. Every community wants its share to be ensured. But then when major parties fail to accommodate minority interests in the proper manner and overlook such matters for other expedient reasons, it's invariably it results in the identity-based politics coming to the fore. And this has happened all over the world. And then we also find, even in the developed world, you find parties based on a religious criteria. Now, if you take Germany, for instance, you see, you will find such parties. And then in a democracy, there must be room for the formation of parties based on ideologies. Those ideologies should not be to hate another community or to create a conflict, but then towards nation building while maintaining your own identity and interests intact.
It's almost like dancing on a razor's edge, isn't it?
No, we need not. When you have a proper understanding of the politics of the country ever since independence, there has been attempts to try and create a national consensus on many issues.
Can I ask you a direct question? We usually do this on Newsline anyway. Can I just put it to you very bluntly? Is there some traction when people say that there are elements in the SLPP who are downright racist and who are using the race card to get elected? There you go. I've asked the question.
That is a matter that the country is well aware of. There are parties, and that the ideology of the party itself on variety of fronts, though they may, their public posture is different from their private convictions. You see, and
what do you say?
most of the country and the minorities are quite aware of this. In fact, as a matter of fact, when His Excellency the President, in his address to the Parliament, when he said that it was the first time that that he was able to be elected by
without the minority vote,
without substantial support from the minorities. You see, what was incumbent on him was to have a introspection as to why the minorities didn't vote for him.
But surely that
doesn't happen.
That surely put the fear of God into people from the minority communities. He was, after all, the defense secretary.
But then you have to also look at his mindset at that time, because he would have been, to a certain extent, quite surprised why such
Why do you
such
think
a polarized mandate, that he got such a polarized mandate. The polarized mandate was a result of the polarization they created themselves. You see, so that created a fear psychosis. You see, and then they could easily say that we leaders deliberately painted a different picture of the candidate or his party, but then their conduct, because after all, the voter is an intelligent voter. He cannot be just hoodwinked, or we cannot, like Pied Pipers, lead them to Armageddon, as it is. You see, it's not so. I mean, leaders and voter is an intelligent person, whether it's Muslims or upcountry Tamils or the northern Tamils or northeastern Tamils. There was this perception, and it's up to the regime to try and see where the fault lies, and then try and see whether they can address this issue. I'm sure if there is a course correction by the regime, they could have substantial support from the minorities.
Mr. Rauf Hakim, thank you very much for having been so upfront and open. I've got a few seconds left, and I'm going to take a question from a member of the public who sent this in. I don't know whether you know the answer, but let me ask you. What is Zahran's wife doing in India?
God knows whether she has escaped or not. I mean, this is something that the intelligence should have been following quite closely. It is, this type of activity.
And, unfortunately, Mr. Hakim, we've run out of time. But thank you very much again for being on the program on Newsline Live. Do pop again, by again, and let's
I would have loved to complete my answer. The problem is that the national intelligence have failed the country. And
that's the problem.
That's a serious problem.
And on that note, that's the way it was on Newsline Live with Mr. Rauf Hakim, the leader of the SLMC. And time now to join Maud Razik.